unreeled. Vintage recordings of fiction recovered from discontinued physical media.
The Princess and the Goblin. There was once a little princess whose father was king over a great country full of mountains and valleys. His palace was built on one of the mountains, and was very grand and beautiful. The princess, whose name was Irene, was born there, but she was sent soon after her birth, because her mother was not very strong, to be brought up by country people in a large house, half castle, half farmhouse, on the side of another mountain, about halfway between its base and its peak. The princess was a sweet little creature, and at the time my story begins was about 8 years old, I think, but she got older very fast. Her face was fair and pretty, with eyes like 2 bits of night sky, each with a star dissolved in the blue. The mountains were full of hollow places underneath, huge caverns and winding ways, some with water running through them. There would not have been much known about them had there not been mines there, great deep pits with long galleries and passages running off from them, which had been dug to get at the ore of which the mountains were full. In the course of digging, the miners came upon many of these natural caverns, in which lived a strange race of beings, called by some gnomes, by some kobolds, by some goblins. There was a legend current in the country that at one time they lived above ground, and were very like other people. But for some reason or other, the king had laid what they thought too severe taxes upon them, imposing stricter laws. And the consequence was that they had all disappeared from the face of the country, having taken refuge in the subterranean caverns, whence they never came out but at night, and then seldom showing themselves in any numbers, and never to many people at once. Those who had caught sight of any of them said that they had greatly altered in the course of generations, and no wonder, seeing they lived away from the sun, in cold and wet and dark places. They were now not ordinarily ugly, but either absolutely hideous or ludicrously grotesque, both in face and form. And as they grew misshapen in body, they had grown in knowledge and cleverness, and now were able to do things no mortal could see the possibility of. In the process of time, they had got a king and a government of their own, whose chief business, beyond their own simple affairs, was to devise trouble for their neighbours. It will now be pretty evident why the little princess had never seen the sky at night. They were much too afraid of the goblins to let her out of the house then, even in the company of ever so many attendants. And they had good reason, as we shall see by and by. One very wet day, when the mountain was covered with mist, which was constantly gathering itself together into raindrops and pouring down on the roofs of the great old house, the princess could not, of course, go out. She got very tired, so tired that even her toys could no longer amuse her. You would wonder at that if I had time to describe to you one half of the toys she had. But then you wouldn't have the toys themselves, and that makes all the difference. You can't get tired of a thing before you have it. She did not know what she would like, except it were to go out and get thoroughly wet, and catch a particularly nice cold, and have to go to bed and take gruel. Then her nurse went out of the room. Even that was a change, and the princess woke up a little and looked about her. Then she tumbled out of her chair and ran out of the door, not the same door the nurse went out of, but one which opened at the foot of a curious old stair of worm-eaten oak, which looked as if never anyone had set foot upon it. She had once before been up 6 steps, and that was sufficient reason in such a day for trying to find out what was at the top of it. Up and up she ran, such a long way it seemed to her, until she came to the top of the third flight. There she found the landing was the end of a long passage. Into this she ran. It was full of doors on each side. There were so many that she did not care to open any, but ran on to the end, where she turned into another passage, also full of doors. She began to get frightened. It was so silent, and all those doors must hide rooms with nobody in them. That was dreadful. Also, the rain made a great trampling noise on the roof. She turned and started at full speed, her little footsteps echoing through the sound of the rain, back for the stairs and her safe nursery. So she thought, but she had lost herself long ago. She ran for some distance, rooms everywhere and no stair. Her little heart beat as fast as her little feet ran, and at last her hope failed her. She threw herself on the floor and broke into a wailing cry broken by sobs. She did not cry long, however, for she was as brave as could be expected of a princess of her age. She got up and brushed the dust from her frock. Then she wiped her eyes with her hands, for princesses don't always have their handkerchiefs in their pockets, any more than some other little girls I know of. Next, she resolved to walk through the passages and look in every direction for the stair. This she did, but without success. She went over the same ground again and again without knowing it, for the passages and doors were all alike. At last, in a corner, through a half-open door, she did see a stair. But alas, it went the wrong way. Instead of going down, it went up. Frightened as she was, however, she could not help wishing to see where yet further the stair could lead. It was very narrow, and so steep that she went on like a four-legged creature on her hands and feet. When she came to the top, she found herself in a little square place with 3 doors. She stood for a moment, without an idea in her little head what to do next. But as she stood, she began to hear a curious humming sound, sometimes stopping for a while and then beginning again. Where could it come from? She laid her ear first to one of the doors, then to another. When she laid her ear against the 3rd door, there could be no doubt where it came from. It must be something in that room. What could it be? She was rather afraid, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear, and she opened the door very gently and peeped in. What do you think she saw? A very old lady who sat spinning. Perhaps you will wonder how the princess could tell that the old lady was an old lady, when I inform you that she was not only beautiful, but her skin was smooth and white. Her hair was combed back from her forehead and face, and hung loose down and all over her back. That is not much like an old lady, is it? Ah, but it was white almost as snow, and although her face was so smooth, her eyes looked so wise that you could not have helped seeing she must be old. The princess, though she could not have told you why, did think her very old indeed. Quite 50, she said to herself. But she was rather older than that, as you shall hear. While the princess stared bewildered, with her head just inside the door, the old lady lifted hers and said in a sweet but old and shaky voice, "Come in, my dear, come in. I am glad to see you." That the princess was a real princess you might see now quite plainly, for she didn't hang on to the handle of the door and stare without moving, but stepped inside at once and shut it gently behind her. "Come to me, my dear," said the old lady. Again the princess did as she was told. She approached the old lady, rather slowly, I confess, but did not stop until she stood by her side, looking up into her face. "Why, what have you been doing with your eyes, child?" asked the old lady. "Crying," answered the princess. "Why, child?" "Because I couldn't find my way down again." "But you could find your way up." "Not at first. Not for a long time." "Why didn't you come to me to wipe your eyes for you?" Please, I didn't know you were here. I will next time." "There's a good child," said the old lady. She had stopped her wheel, but having got the thread fairly going again, she said to the princess, without looking at her, "Do you know my name, child?" "No, I don't know it," answered the princess. "My name is Irene." "That's my name!" cried the princess. "I know that. I let you have mine. I haven't got your name. You've got mine." "How can that be?" asked the princess, bewildered. "I've always had my name." "Your papa, the king, asked me if I had any objection to your having it. And, of course, I hadn't. I let you have it with pleasure." "It was very kind of you to give me your name, and such a pretty one," said the princess. "Oh, not so very kind," said the old lady. "A name is one of those things you can give away and keep all the same. Would you like to know who I am, child?" "Yes, that I should, very much." "I'm your great-great-grandmother," said the lady. "What's that?" asked the princess. "I'm your father's mother's father's mother." "Oh dear, I can't understand that," said the princess. "I will explain it all to you when you are older," the lady went on. "But you will be able to understand this much now. I came here to take care of you." "You must be a queen, too, if you are my great big grandmother." "Yes, I am a queen." "Where is your crown, then?" "In my bedroom." "I should like to see it." "You shall some day. Not today." "I wonder why Nursey never told me." "Nursey doesn't know. She never saw me." "But somebody knows that you are in the house." "No, nobody." "How do you get your dinner, then?" "I keep poultry, of a sort." "Where do you keep them?" "I will show you." "And who makes the chicken broth for you?" "I never kill any of my chickens." "Then I can't understand." "What did you have for breakfast this morning?" asked the lady. "Oh, I had bread and milk and an egg. I dare say you eat their eggs." "Yes, that's it. I eat their eggs." "Is that what makes your hair so white?" "No, my dear. It's old age. I am very old." "I thought so. Are you 50? "Yes, more than that." "Are you 100?
"Yes, more than that. I am too old for you to guess."
"Come and see my chickens." Again she stopped her spinning, then rose, and the princess wondered to see how straight and tall she was. For although she was so old, she didn't stoop a bit. Taking the princess by the hand and leading her out of the room, she opened a door opposite the stair. The princess expected to see a lot of hens and chickens, but instead of that she saw the blue sky first, and then the roofs of the house, with a multitude of the loveliest pigeons, mostly white, but of all colours, walking about. She clapped her hands with delight, and up rose such a flapping of wings that she in her turn was startled. "You frightened my poultry," said the old lady, smiling. "And they frightened me," said the princess, smiling too. "But what very nice poultry! Are the eggs nice?" "Yes, very nice." "What a small egg spoon you must have. Will you give me an egg to eat? I'm rather hungry." "I will some day, but now you must go back, or Nursey will be miserable about you. I dare say she's looking for you everywhere." "Please, will you take me back to her?" "I can't go all the way, but I will take you to the top of the stair, and then you must run down quite fast into your own room." The little princess put her hand in the old lady's, who, looking this way and that, brought her to the top of the first stair, and thence to the bottom of the second, and did not leave her till she was halfway down the third. When she heard the cry of her nurse's pleasure at finding her, she turned and walked up the stairs again, very fast indeed for such a very great-grandmother, and sat down to her spinning, with another strange smile on her sweet old face. About this spinning of hers I will tell you more another time. Guess what she was spinning. Princess?" asked the nurse, taking her in her arms. "It's very unkind of you to hide away so long. I began to be afraid—" Here she checked herself. "What were you afraid of, Nursey?" asked the Princess. "Never mind," she answered. "Perhaps I will tell you another day. Now tell me where you have been." "I've been up a long way to see my very great, huge, old grandmother," said the Princess. "What do you mean by that?" asked the nurse, who thought she was making fun. "I mean I've been to see my great-grandmother. Ah, Nursey, you don't know what a beautiful mother of grandmothers I've got upstairs." "What nonsense you were talking, Princess," said the nurse. "I'm not talking nonsense," returned Irene, rather offended. "I will tell you all about her. She's much taller than you, and much prettier." "Oh, I dare say," remarked the nurse. "And she lives upon pigeons' eggs." "Most likely," said the nurse. "And she sits in an empty room, spinning all day long." "Not a doubt of it," said the nurse. "And she keeps her crown in her bedroom." "Of course, quite the proper place to keep her crown in. She wears it in bed, I'll be bound." "You don't believe me!" exclaimed the Princess, astonished and angry, as well she might be. "Well, you just come up with me and see if I'm not telling the truth." "Indeed, I have other work to do. It's your dinner time, and I won't have any more such nonsense." Of course the nurse was not comfortable in her mind. Not that she suspected the least truth in Irene's story, but that she loved her dearly, and was vexed with herself for having been cross with her. When bedtime came, she undressed her and laid her down. But the child, instead of holding up her little mouth to be kissed, turned away from her and lay still. Then Nurse's heart gave way altogether, and she began to cry. At the sound of her first sob, the Princess turned again and held her face to kiss her as usual. "You little angel!" cried the nurse, and caught her out of bed and walked about the room with her in her arms, kissing and hugging her. "You will let me take you to see my dear old great-big-grandmother, won't you?" said the Princess as she laid her down again. "And you won't say I'm ugly any more, will you, Princess?" "Nursey, I never said you were ugly." "You said I wasn't as pretty as my beautiful grandmother." "Bother your grandmother," said the nurse. "Nurse, that's very rude." "I'm sure I beg your pardon, Princess," said the nurse, though still in an offended tone. But the Princess let the tone pass, and heeded only the words. "You won't say it again, I'm sure," she answered. "I was only going to say that if you had been twice as nice-looking as you are, some king or other would have married you, and then what would have become of me?" "You are an angel," repeated the nurse, again embracing her. "Now," insisted Irene, "you will come and see my grandmother, won't you?" "I will go with you anywhere you like, my cherub," she answered, and in 2 minutes the weary little Princess was fast asleep. When she woke the next morning, the first thing she heard was the rain falling, and the first question that occupied her thoughts was whether she should not ask the nurse to fulfill her promise, and go with her to find her grandmother as soon as she had had her breakfast. But she came to the conclusion that perhaps the lady would not be pleased if she took anyone to see her without first asking leave. So the Princess resolved to take the first opportunity of running up alone and asking whether she might bring her nurse. Now the nurse could not be every moment in the room, and as never before yesterday had the Princess given her the smallest reason for anxiety, it had not come into her head to watch her more closely. So she soon gave her the chance, and Irene was off and up the stairs again. This day's adventure, however, did not turn out like yesterday's, although it began like it. The Princess ran through passage after passage, and could not find the stair of the tower. She was lost once more. But then she found what was next best, not a stair that went up, but one that went down. So down she went, and was singing merrily before she reached the bottom. There, to her surprise, she found herself in the kitchen, where she was a great favourite with the servants. There was a general rush at her the moment she appeared, and the report of where she was soon reached the nurse's ears. She came at once to fetch her, but she never suspected how she had got there, and the Princess kept her own counsel. The next day, the Princess, who was very fond of being out of doors, nearly cried when she saw that the weather was no better. But as the hours went on it grew brighter and brighter, and late in the afternoon the sun broke out. Irene clapped her hands, crying, "See, see, Looty!" That was her pet name for the nurse. "The sun has had his face washed. Look how bright he is. Do get my hat and let us go out for a walk." Looty was very glad to please the princess, and they set out together for a walk up the mountain. The trees at the roadside were all hung over with drops, which sparkled in the sun like jewels, but the brooks that ran down the mountain had changed from the clearest of crystal to a muddy brown. At length Looty observed that the sun was getting low, and said it was time to be getting back. She made the remark again and again, but every time the princess begged her to go on just a little farther, reminding her that it was much easier to go downhill. Suddenly the shadow of a great mountain peak came up from behind and shot in front of them. When the nurse saw it, she started and shook, and catching hold of the princess's hand, turned and began to run down the hill. "What's all the haste, Nursey?" asked Irene, running alongside of her. "We must not be out a moment longer." "But we can't help being out a good many moments longer." It was too true. The nurse almost cried. They were much too far from home. It was against express orders to be out with the princess 1 moment after the sun was down, and they were nearly a mile up the mountain. If His Majesty, Irene's papa, were to hear of it, Looty would certainly be dismissed, and to leave the princess would break her heart. "Looty, Looty! Why do you run so fast? It shakes my teeth when I talk." "Then don't talk," said Looty. But the princess went on talking. "Look, look, Looty! Don't you see that funny man peeping over the rock?" Looty only ran the faster. "Look, look, Looty! There's such a curious creature at the foot of that old tree. It's making faces at us, I do think." Looty gave a stifled scream and ran faster still. Then, looking wildly about her, she gave a great cry and said, "We've taken the wrong turning somewhere, and I don't know where we are. We are lost." Now Irene did not know what good reason there was for her nurse's terror, for the servants had strict orders never to mention the goblins to her. But before she had time to get thoroughly alarmed herself, she heard the sound of singing, and that revived her. Presently she saw a boy coming up the road from the valley to meet them, and this is something like what he sang. 1, 2, 3, bright as gold can be. 4, 5, 6, shovels, mattocks, picks. 7, 8, 9, light your lamp at mine. 10, 11, 12, loosely hold the helve. We're the merry miner boys, make the goblins hold their noise. "I wish you'd hold your noise," said the nurse rudely, for the very word goblin at such a time and in such a place made her tremble. But whether the boy heard her or not, he did not stop his singing. "Hush, scush, scurry, there you go in a hurry. Gobble, gobble, goblin, there you go a-wobblin'. Hobble, hobble, hobblin', cobble, cobble, cobblin'. Hob, bob, goblin, ah!" "There," said the boy, as he stood still opposite them. "That'll do for them. They can't bear singing, and they can't stand that song. They can't sing themselves, for they have no more voice than a crow, and they don't like other people to sing." The boy was dressed in miner's clothes, with a curious cap on his head. He was very nice looking, with eyes as dark as the mines in which he worked, and as sparkling as the crystals in their rocks. He was about 12 years old, and looked happy, merry indeed. "I saw them as I came up," he went on, "and I'm very glad I did. They won't touch you as long as I'm with you." "What difference does that make?" asked the nurse, offended at the freedom with which he spoke to them. "If you're not afraid of them, they're afraid of you. I'm not afraid of them, that's all. But if they think someone is afraid of them, oh, don't they give it him." "What do they do to him?" asked the princess, with a trembling voice. "Don't go frightening the princess," said the nurse. "The princess?" repeated the little miner, taking off his curious cap. "I beg your pardon, but you oughtn't to be out so late. Everybody knows it's against the law." "Yes, indeed it is," said the nurse. "I lost my way, and I shall have to suffer for it." "It is the princess who will suffer for it. I hope they didn't hear you calling her the princess. If they did, they're sure to know her again. They're awfully sharp." "Looty, Looty!" cried the princess. "Take me home!" "Come along," said the boy. "I'll soon set you right again. Shall I carry your little highness?"
"Impertinence,"
murmured the nurse. "No, thank you," said Irene. "I can walk very well, though I can't run as fast as Nursey. If you will give me one hand, Looty will give me another, and then I shall get on famously." "Now let's run," said the nurse. "No, no," said the little miner. "That's the worst thing you can do. They will be after you in a moment." They went on, walking pretty fast, but taking care not to run a step. "I want to talk to you," said Irene to the little miner. "But it's so awkward. I don't know your name." "My name's Curdie, little princess." "What a funny name. Curdie. What more?" "Curdie Peterson. What's your name, please?" "Irene." "What more?" "I don't know what more. What more is my name, Looty?" "Princesses don't have more than one name. They don't want it." "What shall you call me then, Looty?" "Your Royal Highness." "My Royal Highness? No, no, Looty." "Curdie, my name's Irene." "Well, Irene," said Curdie, with a glance at the nurse which showed he enjoyed teasing her, "it is very kind of you to let me call you anything. I like your name very much." He expected the nurse to interfere again, but he saw that she was too frightened to speak. She was staring at something a few yards before them in the middle of the path. Then she found her voice. "You wouldn't think of leaving us till we're safe home, I'm sure," she gasped. "Of course not," said Curdie. "You dear, good, kind Curdie. I'll give you a kiss when we get there," said the princess. The nurse gave her a great pull by the hand, but at that instant the something began to move. One after the other it shot out 4 long things, like 2 arms and 2 legs, but it was now too dark to tell what they were. The nurse began to tremble. Irene clasped Curdie's hand yet faster, and Curdie began to sing again. "Hurry, scurry, bother, smother, there's a toad in the road. Smash it, squash it, fry it, dry it, you're another up and off. There's enough. Ha!" As he uttered the last words, Curdie let go his hold of his companion and rushed at the thing in the road as if he would trample it under his feet. It gave a great spring and ran straight up one of the rocks like a huge spider. Curdie turned back laughing and took Irene's hand again, and she grasped his very tightly. They walked on without another word until the boy cried, "Look! There are the lights of your great house down below. You'll be home in 5 minutes now." They reached it in safety without anyone seeing them. The nurse was rushing in with a hurried and not over-gracious "Good night" to Curdie, but the princess pulled her hand from hers and was just throwing her arms round Curdie's neck when she caught her again and dragged her away. "Looty, Looty! I promised a kiss!" cried Irene. "A princess mustn't give kisses. It's not at all proper," said Looty. "But I promised," said the princess. "Then you shouldn't have promised." "Looty, I promised him a kiss." "Your Royal Highness," said Looty, suddenly grown very respectful, "must come in directly." Here Curdie again came to the rescue. "Never mind, Princess Irene," he said. "You needn't kiss me tonight, but you shan't break your word. I will come another time, you may be sure I will." "Oh, thank you, Curdie," said the princess. "Good night, Irene. Good night, Looty," said Curdie, and turned and was out of sight in a moment. Curdie went home whistling, and was soon fast asleep in bed. He woke in the middle of the night, and thought he heard curious noises outside. He got up, and, opening the door very quietly, went out. Peeping round the corner, he saw, under his own window, a group of stumpy creatures, whom he at once recognized by their shape. But hardly had he begun his 1, 2, 3, when they scurried out of sight. Laughing, he went back to bed and was soon asleep again. Straight after breakfast, he set off with his father for the mine, which they entered by a natural opening under a huge rock, where a little stream rushed out. This led them deep into the hill to the place where they were, at present, digging out the precious ore. With flint and steel and tinderbox, they lighted their lamps, fixed them on their heads, and began. The work was hard at best, though not particularly unpleasant, and some of the miners, when they wanted to earn a little more money, would stop behind the rest and work all night. Those that did so would declare the next morning that they heard, every time they halted for a moment to take breath, a tap-tapping all about them, and all knew those were the sounds of the goblins. They worked only at night, for the miner's night was the goblin's day. Curdie had determined, if his father would permit him, to remain there alone this night, for 2 reasons. First, he wanted to get extra wages that he might buy a warm red petticoat for his mother, and second, he had a faint hope of finding out what the goblins were about under his window the night before. His father made no objection, for he had great confidence in his boy's courage and resources, and about 6 o'clock the rest went away, everyone bidding him good night, for he was a great favourite with them all. For some time Curdie worked away briskly, but towards midnight he began to feel hungry, so getting out a lump of bread, he sat down on a heap of ore to eat his supper. Then he leaned back for 5 minutes' rest before beginning his work again, and laid his head against the rock. Then he heard something which made him sharpen his ears. It sounded like a voice inside the rock. A goblin voice, there could be no doubt about that, and he could make out the words.
"Hadn't we better be moving?"
it said. A rougher and deeper voice replied,
"There's no hurry. That wretched little mole won't be through tonight, if he works ever so hard. He's not by any means at the thinnest place. Still, perhaps in case of accident, it would be as well to be getting out of this. Helfer, you'll take the great chest. That's your business, you know."
"Yes, Dad,"
said a third voice.
"but you must help me to get it on my back. It's awfully heavy, you know."
"It isn't just a bag of smoke, I admit, but you're as strong as a mountain, Helfer."
"I could carry 10 times as much if it wasn't for my feet."
"That is your weak point, I confess, my boy."
"Ain't it yours too, Father?"
"Well, to be honest, it is a goblin weakness. Why they come so soft, I declare I haven't an idea."
"'Specially when your head's so hard."
"Yes, my boy, the goblin's glory is his head. To think how the fellows up above have to put on helmets and things when they go fighting. Ha, ha!"
"Why don't we wear shoes like them, Father? I should like it, 'specially when I've got a chest like that on my back."
"Well, you see, it's not the fashion. The king never wears shoes."
"The Queen does,"
said the first voice, which was evidently that of the mother of the family.
"Yes, but that's for distinction. The king's first wife wore shoes, of course, because she came from upstairs, and so, when she died, the next queen would wear shoes too. It was all pride. That was the only thing I ever knew His Majesty guilty of. Why should he marry an outlandish woman like that? One of our natural enemies, too."
"What made her die, then?"
"She died when the young prince was born."
"How silly of her. It must have been because she wore shoes. Why do they wear shoes up there?"
"To answer that, I must first tell you a secret. I once saw the Queen's feet."
"Without her shoes?"
"Yes, and what do you think? They had toes."
"Toes? What's that?"
"You may well ask. Just imagine. The ends of her feet were split up into 5 or 6 thin pieces. That's why all the men and women upstairs wear shoes. They can't bear the sight of their own feet." "All right, then. As soon as we've finished our supper, we'll be up and going."
"What are you laughing at, husband?"
"I'm laughing to think what a mess the miners will find themselves in some day soon."
"Why, what do you mean?"
"Well, I suppose I must tell you. They're all at the palace consulting about it tonight. I'm going there to hear what night they fix on."
"But what do we do when you're at the palace?"
the mother asked.
I will see you safe in the new house I've been digging for you these last 2 months.
Curdie now knew one of the reasons for the constant sound of the goblin hammers and pickaxes at night. They were making new homes for themselves, to which they might retreat should the miners break through. But he had learned 2 things of far greater importance. The first was that some grievous calamity was almost ready to fall upon the heads of the miners. The second was the one weak point of a goblin's body. He had not known their feet were so tender. If only he could get through the thin layer of rocks in time to follow the goblins when they retreated. He began to feel the wall with his hands, and found that some of the stones were loose enough to be taken out with little noise. Laying hold of a large one, he drew it away and laid it down softly. Then he felt inside the hole and came in contact with something soft. It was quickly withdrawn, and the owner of it gave a cry of fright.
"What's the matter, Helfer?"
asked his mother.
A beast came out of the wall and licked my foot. Nonsense. There are no wild beasts down here,
said his father.
Now then, get your bundles on your backs. Here, Helfer, I'll help you with the chest. Make haste, all of you. Now light your torches and come along.
A sound of many soft feet followed, but soon ceased. Then Curdie tore and pulled at the hole until it was large enough for him to crawl through. He would not betray himself by rekindling his lamp, but the torches of the retreating company threw back light enough to afford him a glance round their deserted home. To his surprise, there was nothing to distinguish it from an ordinary natural cave in the rock. On one side there was even a stream, no thicker than a needle, it is true, but still sufficient to spread a wide dampness over the wall. The troop disappeared at a turn of the way, and it was now both safe and necessary for Curdie to follow them, lest he might lose them altogether. He darted after them like a greyhound, following them through one passage after another. At length, turning a corner too abruptly, he had almost rushed into the middle of the goblin family, for they had already set down all their burdens on the floor of a cave larger than that which they had left. He started back, however, before anyone saw him, and stood watching till the father should come out to go to the palace. Before long he appeared and kept on in the same direction as before, while Curdie followed him again with renewed precautions. For a long time he heard no sound, except something like the rush of a river inside the rock. But at length what seemed the far-off noise of a great shouting reached his ears, which, however, presently ceased. Then he thought he heard a single voice, and keeping after the goblin round another corner, he once more started back, this time in amazement. He was at the entrance of a magnificent cavern, clearly the great palace hall of the goblins, and the great multitude of torches carried by those who crowded the floor lighted up the place quite brilliantly. At the end was a high ledge upon which sat the king and his court, the king on a throne hollowed out of green copper ore. He had been making them a speech, and the applause which followed it was what Curdie had heard. One of the court was now addressing the multitude.
Hence it appears that 2 plans have been working in the strong head of his Majesty for the delivery of his people from our enemies who live above ground, and the time has almost arrived when it will be in our power to take a thorough revenge upon them. "May it please your Majesty,"
cried a voice by the door, which Curdie recognized as that of the goblin he had followed.
"Who is he that interrupts the Chancellor?"
cried another from near the throne.
"Glump,"
answered several voices.
"He is our trusty subject,"
said the king himself.
"Let him come forward and speak."
A lane was parted through the crowd, and Glump, having ascended the platform and bowed to the king, spoke as follows.
"Sire, I would have held my peace had I not known how near was the moment to which the Chancellor had just referred. In all probability, before another day has passed, the enemy will have broken into my house, the partition between being even now not more than a foot in thickness.
Not quite so much, thought Curdie.
Therefore, the sooner we are ready to carry out the plan, the better. I may just add that within the last few days I have perceived a small outbreak of water in my dining room, which has convinced me that close to the spot must lie a deep gulf in its channel. This discovery will, I trust, add considerably to the otherwise immense forces at His Majesty's disposal.
The king graciously acknowledged the speech with a bend of his head, and the Chancellor rose and resumed.
The information which the worthy Glump has given us might have been of considerable importance at the present moment, but for that other design already referred to. Should it be successful, then a peace, all to the advantage of the Goblin Kingdom, will be established, rendered absolutely secure by the pledge which His Royal Highness the Prince will have and hold for the good behaviour of her relatives. Should it fail, however, that would render the latter plan imperative.
Curdie now thought it wise to make his escape before the goblins began to disperse, and slipped quietly away. He had no light, and had therefore to depend upon his memory and his hands once he had left behind the glow from the palace. He hurried on, feeling along the walls of rock, knowing that if he lost his way, it would be the most difficult thing in the world to find it again. Then, suddenly, he found his way blocked and could get no further. It was no use to turn back, for he had not the least idea where he had gone wrong. Frantically, he kept feeling about the walls that hemmed him in, and his hand came upon a place where a tiny stream of water ran down the face of the rock. "What a stupid I am!" he breathed in relief. "I'm actually at the end of my journey." Groping round, he found the place by which he had entered, and wriggled backwards through the hole. It was all he could do to lift the larger stone back into position, but then he sat down on the ore heap and thought. He was pretty sure that the latter plan of the goblins was to inundate the mine by breaking outlets for the water accumulated in the natural reservoirs of the mountains. Their parts being at a higher level, it was clear to Curdie that the mine could be destroyed in an hour. There was not, however, any immediate danger, for the execution of the goblins' plan depended upon the failure of that unknown design, which was to take precedence. Having lighted his lamp, Curdie made his way home, and was let in by his father, to whom he told the whole story. Then the two of them went to bed, and slept soundly till morning. One splendid sunshiny day, Irene, who was playing on the lawn in the garden, heard the distant blast of a bugle. She jumped up with a cry of joy, for she knew that her father was on his way to see her. In a few moments, a little troop came glittering round the shoulder of a hill, with spears and helmets gleaming, banners flying, and horses prancing. On and on they came, until she could clearly distinguish the king. He rode a white horse, and was taller than any of the men with him, and wore a narrow circle of gold set with jewels around his helmet. By this time the people of the house were all gathered at the gate, but Irene stood alone in front of them. When the troop pulled up, she ran to the side of the white horse and held up her arms. The king stooped and took her hands, and in an instant she was on the saddle and clasped in his great strong arms. He had gentle blue eyes, but a nose that made him look like an eagle. A long black beard, streaked with silvery lines, flowed from his mouth almost to his waist. After he had held her to his heart for a minute, he spoke to his white horse, and the beautiful creature, which had been prancing so proudly before, walked as gently as a lady, for he knew he had a little lady on his back, through to the door of the house. There the king set her on the ground, and, dismounting, took her into the great hall, where they sat down to have some refreshment. After they had eaten and drunk, the king stroked the princess's hair and asked, "Now, my child, what shall we do next?" Irene, thinking she should be able to settle a question which constantly perplexed her, said, "I should like you to take me to see my great old grandmother." The king looked grave and said, "What does my little daughter mean?"
I mean the Queen Irene that lives up in the tower. The very old lady, you know, with the long hair of silver.
The king only gazed at his little princess with a look she could not understand.
You know she's there, don't you?
No, said the king very quietly.
Then it must all be a dream,
said Irene. At that moment a snow-white pigeon flew in at an open window and settled upon Irene's head. She broke into a merry laugh and cowered a little. The king stretched out his hand to take the bird, but it flew away again. "Come, my child, we'll have a walk in the garden." It was a lovely place, and, being on a mountainside, there were parts where the rocks came through in great masses. Against one of these was a garden seat, and there they sat and talked together of many things. At length the king said, "You were out late one evening, Irene."
"Yes, Papa. It was my fault, and Lootie was very sorry."
"I must talk to Lootie about it."
"Don't speak loud to her, please, Papa. It was only a mistake for once."
"Once might be too often," murmured the king to himself as he stroked her head in silence. There was no sound to be heard except that of a little stream, which ran merrily out of an opening in the rock by where they sat. He rose, and going into the house alone, sent for Lootie, with whom he had a talk that made her cry. When in the evening he rode away, he left 6 of his attendants behind him, with orders that 3 of them should watch outside the house every night, walking round and round it from sunset to sunrise. The winter drew on, and Irene found things growing dreary. When it was too stormy to go out, and she had got tired of her toys, Lootie would take her about the house, sometimes to the servants' hall or the kitchen, where she ran a great risk of being spoilt. One morning the nurse left her with a housekeeper for a while. To amuse her, she turned out the contents of an old cabinet onto the table, and the princess found her old treasures very interesting. But at length, in handling a curious brooch, she ran the pin of it into her thumb. She would have thought little of it had not the pain increased and the thumb began to swell. The nurse was fetched, the doctor sent for, her hand was poulticed, and long before her usual time she was put to bed. She fell asleep and dreamed, but after a while the pain woke her up to find the moon shining brightly into the room. The poultice had fallen off her hand, and it was burning hot. She fancied if she could hold it into the moonlight, that would cool it. So she got out of bed and went to the window. Suddenly she had a great longing to try once more whether she could not find the old lady. She opened the door very gently, and there was the old staircase. Up and up she went, past all the many rooms, just as she'd seen them before. At the top she stood a moment listening. Yes, it was the hum of the spinning wheel. She tapped gently at the door. "Come in, Irene," said the sweet voice. The princess entered as the old lady asked, "Can you tell me what I am spinning?" "No," Irene replied. "I don't know what you are spinning." "Why couldn't I find you before, great-great-grandmother?" "You would have found me sooner if you hadn't come to think I was a dream. I will give you one reason, though, why you couldn't find me. I didn't want you to find me." The old lady was still at her work. "You haven't told me yet what I am spinning." "Because I don't know. It's very pretty stuff." There was a good bunch of it on the distaff attached to the wheel, but the thread the old lady drew out was so fine Irene could hardly see it. "I am spinning this for you, my child." "For me? What am I to do with it, please?" "I will tell you by and by. I have a week's work there yet, though," she added, looking at the bunch. but I shan't work any longer tonight." "What will you do next, grandmother?" "Go to bed. Would you like to see my bedroom?" "Yes, that I would." The old lady rose and took Irene by the hand, but it was her bad hand, and she gave a little cry of pain. "My child," said her grandmother, "what is the matter?" Irene told her all about it, at which she looked grave, but only said, "Give me your other hand," and, taking her out onto the little dark landing, opened the door opposite. It was the loveliest room the little girl had ever seen, dome-shaped, and from the centre hung a lamp as round as a ball, shining as if with the brightest moonlight. A large oval bed stood in the middle, with a coverlet of rose colour, and velvet curtains all round of a lovely pale blue. Having examined the princess's hand, the old lady took some ointment from a curious silver casket, and the sweetest odour filled the room as she rubbed it gently over the swelling. "Oh, grandmother, it is so nice," said Irene. "Thank you, thank you." Then the old lady took out a large handkerchief of gossamer-like cambric, which she tied round the hand. "I don't think I can let you go away tonight," she said. "Would you like to sleep with me?" "Oh, yes, yes, dear grandmother," said Irene, and would have clapped her hands, forgetting that she could not. Soon she was ready for bed, and what a delicious bed it was! She felt nothing but the softness. The old lady, having undressed herself, lay down beside her. "Why don't you put out your moon?" asked the princess. "That never goes out, night or day," she answered. "In the darkest night, if any of my pigeons are out on a message, they always see my moon and know where to fly to." "This is so nice," said the princess. "I should like to lie here forever." "You may if you will," said the old lady. "But I must put you to one trial. Not a very hard one, I hope. This night week you must come back to me. If you don't, I do not know where you may find me again, and you will soon want me very much." "Oh, please don't let me forget." "You shall not forget, but it will rest with yourself, after all. On the night of next Friday you must come to me. Mind now." "I will try," said the princess. "Then good night," said the old lady, and kissed her on the forehead. In the morning Irene found herself in her own bed. There was no handkerchief on her hand, no swelling, only a sweet odour lingered about it. Her hand was perfectly well. Curdie spent many nights in the mine, always working on for an hour or two at first, before setting out on a reconnoitring expedition. In order to manage the return from it, he had bought a huge ball of fine string, having learned the trick from Hopper my Thumb. The end of the string he fastened to his pickaxe, which figured no bad anchor, and then, with the ball in his hand, unrolling it as he went, set out in the dark through the natural gangs of the Goblin's territory. On the fourth night, guided by the noise of their implements, he found a company of their best diggers hard at work. What were they doing? It could not be the inundation, seeing that had been postponed to something else. He lurked and watched, but again and again had to retreat in haste, a proceeding rendered the more difficult that he had to gather up his string as he returned along its course. But still he had made no discovery as to what the Goblin miners were about. About this time, the gentleman, whom the king had left behind him to watch over the princess, had occasion to be extremely troubled. Every night they saw a score of creatures, to not one of which they could give a name, and not one of which was like another, hideous and ludicrous at once, gambling on the lawn in the moonlight. The ugliness of their faces, the length of legs and necks in some, the apparent absence of either of both in others, made the spectators doubtful of the evidence of their own eyes, and ears as well, for the varied noises they made could be described neither as grunts, nor squeaks, nor roars, nor howls, nor barks, nor yells, nor screams, nor croaks, nor hisses, nor mews, nor shrieks. But as soon as they suspected they were being watched, they all scampered off in the direction of a great rock and vanished. They were, of course, the household animals of the goblins, whose ancestors had taken their ancestors, many centuries before, from the upper regions of light into the lower regions of darkness. In the course of time they had undergone even greater changes than their owners, the human resemblance having greatly increased, while their owners had sunk towards them. In the course of their tunnelling, the goblins, as Curdie had discovered, had broken into the channel of a small stream. Some of the creatures, hovering as they did about their masters, found the hole and, out of curiosity, proceeded to explore. The stream was the same which ran out by the seat on which Irene and her king papa had sat, and the goblin creatures found it jolly fun to get out for a romp, such as they had never had in all their poor miserable lives. During the whole of the week, Irene had been thinking of her promise to the old lady. At length the longed-for Friday arrived, and lest Lootie should be moved to watch her, she endeavoured to keep herself as quiet as possible. But as time passed, the more excited she became. "I see you want your tea, Princess," said the nurse. "I will go and get it. The room feels close. I will open the window a little. The evening is mild. It won't hurt you." I fancy Lootie was longer in returning than she had intended, for when Irene, who had been lost in thought, looked up, she saw it was nearly dark. At that instant something leapt into the room through the open window. It was like a cat, with legs as long as a horse's, although no thicker than those of a cat. Too frightened to cry out, she jumped from her chair and ran from the room. But when she came to the foot of the old stair, she imagined the creature running up those long ascents after her. So she rushed along the hall into the courtyard, then, not daring to look behind, straight out of the gate and up the mountain. At last she could run no longer, and fell by the roadside, where she lay for some time half dead with terror. She ventured, at length, to get half up and peer anxiously about her. It was now so dark she could not tell in what direction the house lay, and between her and home she fancied the dreadful creature lying ready to pounce upon her. A raindrop fell upon her face. She looked up, and her terror was lost in astonishment. A great silver globe was hanging in the air, and her courage revived. Could it be? Yes, it must be. Her great-great-grandmother's lamp, which guided her pigeons home through the darkest night. She had but to keep that light in view, and she must find the house. Speedily, yet softly, she walked down the hill. But all at once, to her dismay, the light vanished. The same instant, however, she caught the lights of the windows, and knew exactly where she was. She made what haste she could, and reached the gates in safety. Then, running through the hall, she bounded up the stair to knock at the old lady's bedroom door. "Come in, Irene," said the silvery voice, and the princess did so. "I've lighted a fire for you. You're cold and wet," her grandmother went on. Then Irene saw that what she had taken for a huge bouquet of red roses on a low stand against the wall was in fact a fire which burned in the shapes of the reddest of roses, filling the room with their scent. Her grandmother was dressed in the loveliest pale blue velvet, over which her hair, no longer white, but of a rich golden colour, streamed like a cataract, flowing from under a circle of shining silver, set with alternated pearls and opals. The princess was so bewildered she drew nigh with timidity. "What's the matter?" asked her grandmother. "You haven't been doing anything wrong. I know that by your face, though it is rather miserable. What's the matter, my dear?" And she held out her arms. "Dear grandmother," said Irene, "I'm not so sure that I haven't done something wrong. I ought to have come up to you at once when the long-legged cat came in at the window, instead of running out on the mountain and making myself such a fright." "You were taken by surprise, my child, and are not so likely to do it again. It is when people do wrong things willfully that they are more likely to do them again. Come." And still she held out her arms. "But, grandmother, you're so beautiful and grand with your crown on, and I am so dirty with mud and rain. I should quite spoil your beautiful blue dress." With a merry little laugh, the lady sprang from her chair, caught the child to her bosom, and kissed her tear-stained face. "You darling," she said, "do you think I care more for my dress than for my little girl? Besides, look here." She stooped to the fire, and Irene could see that her lovely dress was covered in mud, but she took out one of the burning roses, passed it 3 times over the front of it, and not a single stain was to be discovered. "There," she said, "you won't mind coming to me now." Irene had a question to ask. "How was it, grandmother, that I saw your beautiful lamp hanging alone in the great open air? I don't see a window all round." "When I please I can make the lamp shine through the walls, but it is not everybody can see it. Now, you must sit in my chair while I fetch you the present I have been spinning for you. It is finished now, and I have been keeping it warm under one of my brooding pigeons." The little girl had hardly sat down when her grandmother returned with a shimmering ball in her hand, about the size of a pigeon's egg. "There, Irene, that is my work for you," she said. "Is that all you're spinning, grandmother?" "All since you came to the house. There is more there than you think." "How pretty it is! What am I to do with it, please?" "That I will now explain to you," answered the lady. Apart from the ball, she had a small ring in her hand, and did something with the two, Irene could not see what. "Now give me your right hand," she said. Irene held it up, and the lady put the ring on her forefinger. "What a beautiful ring!" said Irene. "Please, am I to keep it?" "Always." "Oh, thank you, grandmother," said the princess. "But—" "But what?" asked her grandmother. "What am I to say when Lootie asks me where I got it?" "You will ask her where you got it. Rest assured you will." So saying, the lady turned and placed the ball in a drawer of her cabinet. "Oh, am I not to take it with me?" exclaimed Irene. "You are to take it with you. I fastened the end to the ring on your finger." "I can't see it there, grandmother." "Feel, a little way from the ring, towards the cabinet." "Oh, I do feel it, but I can't see it." "No, the thread is too fine for you to see. Now listen. If ever you find yourself in danger, you must take off your ring and put it under the pillow of your bed. Then you must lay your forefinger, the same that wore the ring, upon the thread, and follow it wherever it leads you. But remember, it may seem to you a very roundabout way indeed, and you must not doubt the thread." She sat down and took Irene upon her knee. "But," said the princess sleepily, "won't the thread get in somebody's way and be broken, if the one end is fast to my ring and the other laid in your cabinet?" "You will find that all arrange itself," replied the old lady, but the tired little girl barely heard her. She had fallen fast asleep. She woke next morning, back in her own room, to find the nurse bending over her. "How your ring does glow this morning, princess," she said. "Just like a fiery rose." "Does it?" returned Irene. "Who gave me the ring, Lootie? I know I've had it a long time, but where did I get it? I don't remember." "I think it must have been your mother gave it to you, princess. But really, for as long as you have worn it, I don't remember that I ever heard. I will ask my king, Papa, the next time he comes, said Irene. Curdie was as watchful as ever. Every other night or so he followed the goblins about, but seemed no nearer finding out what they had in view. As at first, he always kept hold of the end of his string, while his pickaxe, left just outside the hole by which he entered the goblins' country from the mine, continued to serve as an anchor and hold fast the other end. One night, after dodging about and listening till he was nearly falling asleep with weariness, he began to roll up his ball, for he had resolved to go home to bed. It was not long, however, before he began to feel bewildered. He passed goblin houses that he was sure he had not passed when he came. Could his string have led him wrong? If so, he was helpless. Seeing he could do no better, he would at least find where the end of his string was. He knew by the size of the ball that he was getting near the last of it, when he began to feel a tugging and pulling at it. Turning a sharp corner, he thought he heard strange noises, and these increased until, turning a second sharp corner, he found himself in the midst of it, tumbling over a wallowing mass, which he knew must be a knot of the goblin's creatures. As he scrambled to get up, he caught several scratches and bites, but his hand fell upon his pickaxe, and he lay about with it right and left in the dark. By their hideous cries and retreating howls, he knew that he had routed them. It was clear that the goblin's creatures had found his axe, had between them carried it off, and so led him he knew not where. But for all his thinking he could not tell what he ought to do, until suddenly he became aware of a glimmer of light in the distance, and he set out for it as fast as the unknown and rugged way would permit. After trying in vain to find an entrance to the place where it was burning, he came to a small chamber in which an opening, high in the wall, revealed a glow beyond. To this opening he managed to scramble up, and then he saw a strange sight. Below sat a little group of goblins around a fire, the smoke of which vanished in the darkness far aloft. The company was evidently of a superior order, for everyone wore stones about head or arms or waist. Nor had Curdie looked long before he recognized the king himself, and found he had made his way into the inner apartment of the royal family. He had never had such a good chance of hearing something. He crept through the hole as softly as he could, scrambled down the wall towards them, then sat down and listened. The king, the queen, and probably the crown prince and the prime minister were talking together. He was sure of the queen by her shoes, for as she warmed her feet at the fire, he saw them quite plainly.
"That will be fun,"
said the one he took for the crown prince.
"I don't see why you should think it such a grand affair,"
said his stepmother.
You must remember, my spouse,
interposed his majesty.
he has got the same blood in him. His mother—
"Don't talk to me of his mother. You positively encourage his unnatural fancies. Whatever belongs to that mother ought to be cut out of him."
You forget yourself, my dear,
said the king.
"I do not,"
said the queen.
"I don't wear shoes for nothing."
This is no whim of Harelip's,
the king insisted,
but a matter of state policy, affording him the pleasure of sacrificing himself to the public good. Is that not so, Harelip?
"Yes, father, of course it is. Only it will be nice to make her cry. I'll have the skin taken off between her toes and tie them up so they grow together. Then her feet will be like other people's, and there will be no occasion for her to wear shoes."
Anxious to hear everything they might say, Curdie ventured to slide down a smooth part of the rock to a projection below, but it gave way, and down he came with a rush on the floor of the cavern, bringing with him a great shower of stones. The goblins jumped from their seats, while the king, drawing himself up to his full height of 4 feet, and spreading himself to his full breadth of 3½ strutted up to Curdie to say with dignity,
"Pray, what right have you in my palace?"
"The right of necessity, your majesty," answered Curdie. I lost my way and did not know where I was wandering to."
"How did you get in?"
"By a hole in the mountain."
"But you are a miner," said the king, "and you will oblige me by walking out of my dominions at once."
Well knowing what a mockery lay in the words. "With pleasure, if your majesty will give me a guide," said Curdie.
"I will give you 1,000,
said the king with a scoffing air. He gave a strange shout, and in rushed goblins till the cave was swarming.
"Stand back," said Curdie.
They only grinned and pressed closer. Curdie bethought himself and began to rhyme.
10, 20, 30, you're all so very dirty. 20, 30, 40, you're all so thick and snorty. 30, 40, 50, you're all so puff and snifty. 40, 50, 60, beast and man so mixty.
The goblins fell back a little as he began, and made horrible grimaces all through the rhyme, as if eating something so disagreeable that it set their teeth on edge. But the moment it was over, they crowded on him again, and shot out 100 long arms, with a multitude of thick, nailless fingers at the ends of them, to lay hold upon him. Curdie, however, drew back in time, and just at that critical moment remembered the vulnerable part of the goblin body. He made a sudden rush at the king, and stamped as hard as he could on his feet. His Majesty gave a most unkingly howl, and almost fell into the fire. Curdie then rushed into the crowd, stamping right and left. The goblins drew back, howling on every side, when a new assailant suddenly faced him. The Queen, with flaming eyes and expanding nostrils, rushed at him. Forgetting her shoes, they were of granite, hollowed like French sabots, he made a great stamp on one of her feet, but she instantly returned it with very different effect, causing him frightful pain. Then she caught him up in her arms, and, rushing with him across the cave, dashed him into a hole in the wall with a force that stunned him. When he came to himself, there was perfect silence about him, and utter darkness, but for the merest glimmer in one tiny spot. He crawled to it, and found they had heaved a slab against the mouth of the hole, past the edge of which a poor little gleam found its way from the fire. He could not move it a hair-breadth, for they had piled a great heap of stones against it. He sat down and tried to think, but soon fell fast asleep. He must have slept a long time, for when he awoke he felt wonderfully restored, indeed almost well, and very hungry. There were voices in the outer cave. Curdie listened, and soon found they were talking of himself.
"How long will it take?"
asked Harelip.
"Not many days,"
answered the king.
"They are poor feeble creatures, those sun people, and want to be always eating. We can go a week at a time without food, and be all the better for it. But I've been told they eat 2 or 3 times every day. Can you believe it? Yes, I judge a week of starvation will do for him."
The Queen laughed. She seemed in far better humour than the night before.
"It does seem a pity to waste so much fresh meat," she said. "What I mean is that by the time he is starved there will hardly be a picking upon his bones."
The king gave a great laugh.
"Well, my spouse, you may have him when you like," he said. "I don't fancy him for my part. I am pretty sure he is tough eating."
Once there was a goblin living in a hole. Busy he was cobbling a shoe without a sole.
"What's that horrible noise?"
cried the Queen, shuddering from pot-metal head to granite shoes.
"I declare," said the king, "it's the sun creature in the hole."
"Stop that disgusting noise!"
cried the Crown Prince valiantly.
"Now, or I'll break your head!"
"Break away!" shouted Curdie, and began singing again. Once there was a goblin living in a hole.
"I really can't bear it,"
said the Queen.
"If only I could get at his horrid toes with my slippers again."
"I think we had better go to bed,"
said the king.
"It's not time to go to bed,"
said the Queen. Go to bed, goblin do, help the Queen take off her shoe. If you do, it will disclose a horrid set of sprouting toes.
"What a lie!"
roared the Queen in a rage.
"By the way, that reminds me,"
said the king,
"that for as long as we have been married, I have never seen your feet, Queen.
I think you might take off your shoes when you go to bed. They positively hurt me sometimes." "I will do as I like," retorted the Queen sulkily. "I will sleep in my shoes. It is my royal privilege. Harelip, go to bed." "I'm going," said Harelip sleepily.
"So am I,"
said the King.
"Come along, then," said the Queen, "and mind you are good, or I'll—"
"Oh, no, no, no!"
screamed the King in the most supplicating of tones. Curdie heard only a muttered reply in the distance, and then the cave was quite still. They had left the fire burning, and the light came through brighter than before. Curdie thought it was time to try again if anything could be done. He gave a great rush with his shoulder against the slab, but it yielded no more than if it had been part of the rock. That same morning, the princess woke in a terrible fright. There was a hideous noise in her room, of creatures snarling and hissing and racketing about as if they were fighting. The moment she came to herself, she remembered what her grandmother told her to do when she was frightened. She immediately took off her ring and put it under her pillow. As she did so, she fancied she felt a finger and thumb take it gently from under her palm. "It must be my grandmother," she said to herself, and the thought gave her such courage that she stopped to put on her dainty little slippers before running from the room. While doing this, she caught sight of a long cloak of sky blue thrown over the back of the chair. She had never seen it before, but it was evidently waiting for her. She put it on, then, feeling with the forefinger of her right hand, soon found her grandmother's thread, which she proceeded to follow, expecting it would lead her straight up the old stair. To her dismay, it turned in quite the opposite direction. It led her through certain narrow passages, out onto a small backyard, then through a door in the wall which took her straight up the mountain. The cause of her alarm was less frightening than she supposed. The cook's great black cat had burst into the room, pursued by the housekeeper's terrier, and they both commenced a battle royal. How the nurse came to sleep through it was a mystery, but I suspect the old lady had something to do with it. It was a clear, warm morning. The wind blew deliciously over the mountainside, and here and there she saw a late primrose. After leading her up a good distance, the thread turned to the left. Down and down the path went, then up, then down, and then up again, getting rugged and more rugged as it went. And still along the path went the silvery thread, and still along the thread went Irene's rose-tipped forefinger. By and by she came to a little stream that jabbered and prattled down the hill, and up the side of the stream went both path and thread. It ran out of a hole in the rock, and Irene shuddered when she found that the thread was actually taking her into the hole out of which the stream ran. She did not hesitate. Right into the hole she went. For a little way there was a brown glimmer, but at the first turn she was in total darkness. The path went down very steeply, and there were places where she had to go down rough steps and even sometimes a ladder. Sometimes she heard the noise of water gurgling inside the rock. At last she spied a dull red shine, and came up into a cavern where glowed the red embers of a fire. Here the thread began to rise. It rose as high as her head and higher still. What should she do if she lost her hold? She was pulling it down. She might break it. She could see it far up, glowing in the light of the embers. But presently she came to a huge heap of stones, piled in a slope against the wall of the cavern. On these she climbed, and soon recovered the level of the thread, only to find that it vanished through the heap of stones. It had gone where she could no longer follow it, had brought her into a horrible cave, and there left her. She was forsaken indeed. "When shall I wake?" she said to herself in an agony, but knew it was no dream. She threw herself on the heap and began to cry. It was well she did not know what creatures, one of them with stone shoes on her feet, were lying in the next cave. But neither did she know who was on the other side of the slab. As the princess lay and sobbed, She kept feeling the thread mechanically, following it with her finger up to the stones in which it disappeared. By and by she began to poke her fingers in after it, and, all at once, it came into her head that she might remove some of the stones and see where the thread went next. She jumped to her feet and began to throw away the stones from the top as fast as she could. She got about halfway down when she started and nearly fell with fright. Close to her ear, it seemed, a voice broke out singing, "Jobber, bother, smash, you'll have it all in a crash. Jobber, smash, bother, you'll have the worst of the pother. Smash, bother, jabber." Here Curdie stopped, because he could not find a rhyme to jabber, but he had uttered enough to let Irene know who he was. "It's Curdie!" she cried joyfully.
"Hush, hush,"
came Curdie's voice again.
"Speak softly."
"Why, you were singing loudly," said Irene.
"Yes, but they know I'm here, and they don't know you are. Who are you?"
"I'm Irene."
"Why, however did you come here, Irene?"
"My great-great-grandmother sent me, and I think I found out why. You can't get out, I suppose?"
"No, I can't. What are you doing?"
"Clearing away a huge heap of stones."
"There's a princess,"
exclaimed Curdie with delight, but still in little more than a whisper.
"I can't think how you got here, though."
"My grandmother sent me after her thread."
"You can tell me all about it when we get out, then. There's no time to lose now."
And Irene went to work, as fresh as when she began. "There's such a lot of stones," she said. "It will take me a long time to get them all away."
"I don't think you will have to move the lower half. Do you see a slab laid against the wall?"
"Yes, I do."
"Then I think," said Curdie, "when you have cleared the slab about halfway down, I shall be able to push it over."
The princess went on harder than ever. At last she said in a joyous whisper,
"Now, Curdie, I think if you were to give a great push, the slab would tumble away." "Stand quite clear of it, then, and let me know when you are ready."
Irene got off the heap and stood to one side.
"Now, Curdie," she cried.
Curdie gave a great rush with his shoulder against it. Out tumbled the slab onto the heap, and out Curdie crept over the top of it.
"You've saved my life, Irene," he whispered.
"Oh, Curdie, I'm so glad. Let's get out of this horrid place as fast as we can."
"That's easier said than done,"
returned he, searching the floor of the cavern for his pickaxe.
"Here it is,"
he cried.
"No, it isn't,"
he added in a disappointed tone.
"What can it be, then? I declare it's a torch. That is jolly."
He lighted it by blowing the last embers of the expiring fire. When he looked up, he caught sight of Irene disappearing in the hole out of which he himself had just come.
"Where are you going?"
he cried.
"That's not the way out."
"I know that," whispered Irene. "But this is the way my thread goes, and I must follow it."
"What nonsense the child talks,"
said Curdie to himself.
"I must follow her, though, and see she comes to no harm."
So he crept over the slab once more into the hole, with his torch in his hand. But when he looked about in it, he could see her nowhere. And now he discovered that although the hole was small, it was much longer than he had supposed. So he went after her, and when he turned the next corner, there she was waiting for him. "I knew you couldn't go wrong in that narrow hole," she said. "But now you must keep by me, for here is a great wide place." She walked as confidently as if she knew every step of the way. Curdie went after her, flashing his torch about to see what lay around them. Suddenly he started back a pace as the light fell upon something close by. It was a raised platform of rock, covered with sheepskins, upon which lay two horrible figures asleep, at once recognized by Curdie as the king and queen of the goblins. He lowered his torch instantly, lest the light should awake them. As he did so, it flashed upon his pickaxe, lying by the side of the queen, whose hand lay close by the handle of it.
"Stop one moment," he whispered. "Hold my torch and don't let the light on their faces."
Irene shuddered when she saw the frightful creatures. Curdie drew his pickaxe carefully away, and as he did so spied the Queen's feet projecting from under the skins. The great clumsy granite shoes exposed thus to his hand were a temptation not to be resisted. He laid hold of one, and, with cautious effort, drew it off. The moment he succeeded, he saw, to his astonishment, that what he had sung in ignorance to annoy the Queen was actually true. She had 6 horrible toes. The Queen gave a growl and sat up in bed. The same instant the King awoke also and sat up beside her. "Run, Irene!" cried Curdie, for although he was not afraid for himself, he was for the Princess. "Here, Curdie, take my hand," she said. He darted to her side, forgetting neither the Queen's shoe nor his pickaxe, as she sped fearlessly where her thread guided her. He heard the Queen give a great bellow, but they had a good start. The thread brought them to a very narrow opening, through which Irene crept easily and Curdie with difficulty. "Now," he said, "I think we shall be safe." "Of course we shall," returned Irene. "My grandmother is taking care of us." "That's all nonsense," said Curdie. "Oh, indeed," retorted the Princess. "Then why do you think we shall be safe?" "Because the King and Queen are far too stout to get through that hole." "I should never call such creatures as those a king and queen." "Their own people do, though," replied Curdie, and as they walked leisurely along, he gave her a full account of the characters and habits of the goblins, and of his own adventures with them. Finally he asked, "But how did you find your way to me?" "I told you already, by keeping my finger on my grandmother's thread, as I am doing now." "You don't mean you've got the thread there?" "Of course I do. There," she added, guiding Curdie's hand to the thread. "You feel it yourself, don't you?" "I feel nothing at all," replied Curdie. "Then what can be the matter with your finger?" said Irene. And now the thread went downwards, and led Irene's hand to a hole in the floor of the cavern, whence came a sound of running water. "It goes into the ground now, Curdie," she said, stopping. He had been listening to another sound, which also had been growing louder. Irene heard it also. "What is that noise?" she asked. "Do you know, Curdie?" "Yes, it is the goblins digging and burrowing." "And you don't know what they do it for?" "I haven't the least idea." They went on down and down with the running water, Curdie getting more and more afraid it was leading them to some terrible gulf in the heart of the mountain. But at length they spied a glimmer of light, and in a minute more they were almost blinded by the full sunlight as they stood in Irene's own garden, close by the seat on which she and her king-papa had sat. They had come out by the channel of the little stream. She danced and clapped her hands with delight. "Come along, Curdie, and Lootie will get you something to eat. I am sure you must want it very much." "Indeed I do, but my father and mother will be so anxious about me. I must hurry home." "Very well, Curdie, but I will take you through the house, for that is nearest." When they got in, Irene found that the thread, as she had half expected, went up the old staircase, and a new thought struck her. She turned to Curdie and said, "My grandmother wants me. Do come up with me and see her. Then you will know that I have been telling you the truth. Please do come, dear Curdie." The little miner could not withstand this appeal. He yielded and followed her up the stair. Arriving at the top, there was no sound of the spinning wheel, so Irene knocked at the door of the bedroom. "Come in," answered the sweet voice of her grandmother, and Irene opened the door and entered, followed by Curdie. "You darling," cried the lady, who was seated by a fire of red roses. "I've been waiting for you, and indeed getting a little anxious." As she spoke, she took the princess in her arms and placed her upon her lap. She was dressed in white now, and looking, if possible, more lovely than ever. "I've brought Curdie, grandmother. He wouldn't believe what I told him, so I've brought him." "People must believe what they can, and those who believe more must not be hard on those who believe less." "Ah, yes, grandmother, I dare say. I'm sure you are right. But he'll believe now." "I don't know that," replied her grandmother. "Won't you, Curdie?" said Irene, looking round at him. He was obviously bewildered. "Make a bow to my grandmother, Curdie." "I don't see any grandmother." "Don't see my grandmother when I'm sitting on her lap?" "No, I don't." "Nor the fire of roses? Nor the beautiful light, like the moon, hanging from the roof?" "You're making game of me, Your Royal Highness, and after what we have come through together this day, I don't think it is kind of you." "What do you see?" asked Irene. "I see a big, bare garret room." "And what more do you see?" "I see a tub, and a heap of musty straw, and a withered apple, and a ray of sunshine coming through a hole in the roof. I think you had better drop it, Princess, and go down to the nursery like a good girl." "But don't you hear my grandmother talking to me?" asked Irene, almost crying. "No. I hear the cooing of a lot of pigeons. If you won't come down, I will go without you. I think that will be better anyhow." "What shall I do, grandmother?" sobbed the princess. "You must give him time," said her grandmother. "I will take care of what Curdie thinks of you in the end. Let him go now." "You're not coming, are you?" asked Curdie. "No, Curdie. My grandmother says I must let you go. Turn to the right when you get to the bottom of all the stairs." "I don't doubt I can find my way, without you, Princess, or your old granny's thread either," said Curdie quite rudely. "Oh, Curdie, Curdie!" "I wish I had gone home at once. I'm very much obliged to you, Irene, for getting me out of the hole, but I wish you hadn't made a fool of me afterwards." He said this as he opened the door, and without another word went down the stairs. "What does it all mean, grandmother?" Irene sobbed. "It means, my love, that I did not wish to show myself. Curdie is not yet able to believe some things. Seeing is not believing, it is only seeing. But there is one thing much more necessary." "What is that, grandmother?" "To understand other people." "Yes, grandmother." "Dry your eyes," said the lady. "See, here is your ring." She took it from her little finger and put it on Irene's forefinger. "Oh, thank you, thank you. I feel so safe now." "You are very tired, my child. Your hands are hurt with the stones, and I have counted 9 bruises on you. Look what you are like." The lady held up to her a little mirror, and the princess burst into a merry laugh at the sight. She was so draggled with the stream she looked like a gypsy. The lady laughed too, as she removed Irene's cloak and nightgown and led her to a large silver bath. Looking into it, she saw no bottom, but the stars shining miles away in a great blue gulf. The next instant she sank in the clear, cool water, feeling more than happy, perfectly blissful. On being lifted out, she felt as if she had been made over again. Every bruise and all weariness were gone, and her hands were soft and whole as ever. "Now I am going to put you to bed," said her grandmother. Curdie went up the mountain, neither whistling nor singing, for he was vexed with Irene for having taken him in, and vexed with himself for having spoken to her so rudely. His mother gave a cry of joy when she saw him, and at once set about getting him a meal. When it was ready, she left him to eat it, and hurried to the mine to let his father know he was safe. When she came back, she found him fast asleep on her bed, nor did he wake until his father came home in the evening. "Now, Curdie," his mother said as they sat at supper, "tell us the whole story from beginning to end, just as it all happened." Curdie obeyed, and told everything to the point where they came out upon the lawn in the garden of the king's house. "And what happened after that?" asked his mother. "There must be something more. Besides, you do not speak of that lovely child as I should like to hear you. She saved your life at the risk of her own, and yet you don't seem to think much of it." She talked such nonsense, answered Curdie, and told me a pack of things that weren't a bit true, and I can't get over it. What were they? Asked his father. Your mother may be able to throw some light upon them. Then Curdie made a clean breast of it, and told them everything. Then they all sat silent for some time. At last Curdie's mother spoke. You confess, my boy, there is something about the whole affair you do not understand. Yes, of course, mother. I cannot understand how a child knowing nothing about the mountain, or even that I was shut up in it, should come all that way alone, straight to where I was. Then you have no right to say what she told you was not true. She did take you out, and she must have had something to guide her. Why not a thread as well as a rope or anything else? I still can't believe it. I don't blame you for not being able to believe it, but I do blame you for fancying such a child would try to deceive you. But what do you make of the grandmother? That is what I can't get over. To take me up to an old garret and try to persuade me, against the sight of my own eyes, that it was a beautiful room with no end of things in it, when there was nothing but an old tub and a withered apple. It was too bad. Perhaps some people can see things other people can't see, Curdie, said his mother gravely. I think I will tell you something I saw myself once. Only perhaps you won't believe me either. Oh, mother, mother, cried Curdie. I don't deserve that, surely. But what I am going to tell you is very strange. Do tell me, mother. Perhaps it will help me to think better of the princess. Well, his mother began, your father was working in the mine one night, and I had been down with his supper. It was soon after we were married, and not very long before you were born. Coming back home alone, I was suddenly surrounded by about 6 of the goblins, the first I had ever seen. One of them blocked up the path, and they all began tormenting and teasing me in a way it makes me shudder to think of even now. If only I had been with you, cried father and son in a breath. The mother gave a funny little smile and went on. They had torn my clothes, and I was afraid they were going to tear myself to pieces, when suddenly a great white soft light shone upon me. It came from a large globe, not very high up. The goblins looked dazed, and I thought they were going to run away, but presently they started persecuting me again. The same moment, however, down the path of light from the globe came a bird. It looked just like a white pigeon, but when the goblins caught sight of it, they took to their heels and scampered away. How strange, exclaimed Curdie. It's exactly as your mother told it to me the very next morning, said his father. You don't think I'm doubting my own mother? Cried Curdie. There are mothers far more likely to tell lies than that little girl, his mother said. If she were to lie, I would begin to doubt my own word. Depend upon it, you will have to be sorry for behaving so to her, Curdie. You ought at least to have held your tongue. I am sorry now, answered Curdie. You ought to go and tell her so, then. I don't see how I could manage that. They wouldn't let a miner boy like me have a word with her alone. But I may have a chance before long, and meantime I must try to do something for her. I think, father, I have got on the track at last. Have you indeed, my boy? Said his father. I am sure you deserve some success. What have you found out? Well, I think I have nearly discovered in what direction the goblins are mining. Just as we came to the channel by which we got out of the mountain, I heard them somewhere near, possibly working towards the king's house. And what I want to do tonight is to make sure whether they are or not. How much wiser will you be then? Asked his mother. Ah, wait a minute. Now, I told you that when I came upon their royal family in the cave, they were talking of their prince, Harelip, they call him, marrying a sun woman, that means one of us, one with toes to her feet. Well, one of them said that peace would be secured by the pledge the prince would hold for the good behaviour of her relatives. That's what he said, and he must have meant the sun woman the prince was to marry. I am quite sure the king is much too proud to wish his son to marry any but a princess. I see what you are driving at now, said his mother. But,
said his father. "Our king would dig the mountain to the plain before he would have his princess the wife of a goblin."
"It's too horrible to think of," said Curdie. "But they shan't have her, at least if I can help it. So, mother dear, will you get me a lump of peas pudding, and I will set out at once to explore the channel again. I saw a place where I can climb over the wall of the garden quite easily." Hours later he returned for his breakfast, satisfied that the goblins were mining in the direction of the king's house, intending to burrow under the walls and rise up inside it, in order to lay hands on the little princess and carry her off for a wife to their horrid harelip. The men-at-arms kept watching about the house. Curdie kept watching in the mountains, and the goblins kept burrowing deeper into the earth. As long as they went deeper, Curdie judged, there was no immediate danger. At length, however, he began to see signs of a change, so he judged it time to transfer his observation to another quarter. The next few nights he climbed over the wall to the king's house and remained in the garden, creeping from one spot to the other, and lying at full length with his ear to the ground, listening. Then, early one evening, his watching came to a sudden end. A whiz in his ear and a blow upon his leg startled him, but he jumped up to take the chance of escape by flight. He fell, however, with a keen shoot of pain, for the bolt of a crossbow had wounded his leg, and the blood was streaming from it. He was instantly laid hold of by 2 or 3 of the men-at-arms.
"It's a boy!" cried one. "I thought it was one of those demons. What are you doing about here?" he asked Curdie.
"I will tell you if you promise to listen to me and not do anything rash."
"I call that cool," said the man, laughing. "He will tell us what mischief he was up to if we promise to do what pleases him."
"I was about no mischief," said Curdie. Then he turned faint and fell senseless on the grass. Resolving to keep him a prisoner until they could search into the affair, the men brought him round a little and attended to his wound. Then, having carried him into the house, they laid him upon a mattress in a disused room and locked the door. He passed a troubled night, and in the morning they found him talking wildly. That evening he came to himself to find one of the men-at-arms in the room, so, as he was unable to watch any more, he told the soldier all he knew about the goblins, and begged him to tell his companions to watch with 10-fold vigilance. But the man concluded that he was only raving still. When Curdie fell asleep, he began to dream about everything that had happened to him since he met the princess. Suddenly he heard a great thundering sound. "The goblins are coming!" he shouted, "to carry off the princess from under their stupid noses! But they shan't! They shan't!" He jumped up, as he thought, but, to his dismay, found he was still lying in bed, for in fact he was not awake, only dreaming he was. Fancying he heard the goblins all over the house, he gave a great cry. Then, as he thought, the door opened, and he saw a lady with white hair, carrying a silver box in her hand, enter the room. She came to his bed, stroked his head with cool, soft hands, took the dressing from his leg, rubbed it with something that smelt like roses, and then waved her hands over him 3 times. At the last wave everything vanished, and he remembered nothing more until he woke in earnest. The house was in an uproar. The goblins were inside. He sprang from his bed, hurried on some of his clothes, not forgetting his shoes, which were armed with nails. Then, spying an old hunting knife hanging on the wall, he caught it and rushed down the stairs, guided by the sounds of strife. The ground floor was swarming with goblins, and he rushed among them, shouting, "1, 2, hit and hew! 3, 4, blast and bore!" And with every rhyme he came down with a great stamp upon a foot, cutting at the same time their faces, and away they scattered in every direction. The captain of the men-at-arms was on the floor, buried beneath a wallowing mass, and over each of his men was standing a knot of goblins, while as many as could find room were sitting upon their prostrate bodies. Dancing and gyrating like a whirlwind, Curdie began with the group nearest him, and soon had the knights on their legs again. "Stamp on their feet!" he cried, as each man rose, and in a few minutes the hall was nearly empty, the the goblins running from it as fast as they could, howling and shrieking. The queen rushed at him with a shriek of rage and dismay, but he came down with all the weight of his iron-shod shoe upon her skin-shod foot, and with a hideous howl she squatted on the floor and took it in both her hands. "Where's the princess?" cried Curdie again and again. No one knew, and they all rushed in search of her. Through every room in the house they went, but nowhere was she to be found. Neither was one of the servants to be seen. But Curdie began to hear a distant hubbub, and his sharp ears guided him to a stair and so to the wine-cellar. It was full of goblins, whom the butler was supplying with wine as fast as he could draw it. While the queen and her party had encountered the men-at-arms, Harelip, with another company, had gone off to search the house. They captured everyone they met and hurried away with them to the caverns below. But when the butler, who was among them, found that their path led through the wine-cellar, he persuaded them to taste the wine, and, as he had hoped, they no sooner tasted than they wanted more. When Curdie entered, he saw, in the farthest corner, a terrified group of the domestics, and among them was Lootie, but nowhere could he see the princess. Seized with the horrible conviction that Harelip had already carried her off, he rushed forward, stamping and cutting with greater fury than ever. "Stamp on their feet! Stamp on their feet!" he shouted, and in a moment the goblins were disappearing through the hole in the floor like rats and mice. Presently, however, they were reinforced from above by the king and his party, with the redoubtable queen at their head. Finding Curdie again busy among her unfortunate subjects, she rushed at him once more, and a regular stamping fight got up between them. At the same moment in rushed the captain and his men, who ran at the goblins, stamping furiously. They dared not encounter such an onslaught, and away they scurried, the queen foremost. Having rescued the servants, they set about searching the house once more. Curdie requested Lootie to take him to the princess's room, and there they found the bedclothes and the princess's garments scattered all over the floor. It was only too evident that the goblins had been there, and Curdie had no longer any doubts that she had been carried off. With a pang of despair, he saw how wrong they had been in not taking the king and queen prisoner and holding them hostage for the princess. But he determined to find and rescue her as she had found and rescued him, or meet the worst fate to which the goblins could doom him. Just as he was turning for the cellar to follow the goblins into their hole, something touched his hand. He could see nothing, but feeling and peering about in the grey of the dawn, his fingers came upon a tight thread. It flashed upon him that this must be the princess's thread, so he followed it with his finger, and was soon out of the house and onto the mountainside, surprised that it should have led the princess, as he supposed it must, into the mountain. When he arrived, however, at the place where the path turned off from the mine, he found that the thread did not turn with it, but went straight up the mountain. Could it be that the thread was leading him home? Could the princess be there? He bounded up the mountain to his mother's door and entered. There sat his mother by the fire, and in her arms lay the princess, fast asleep. All at once she opened her eyes and fixed them on him. "Oh, Curdie, you're come," she said quietly. "I thought you would." He stood before her with downcast eyes. "Irene," he said, "I am very sorry I did not believe you." "Oh, never mind, Curdie," answered the princess. "You couldn't, you know. You do believe me now, don't you?" "I can't help it now. I ought to have helped it before." "Why can't you help it now?" "Because, just as I was going into the mountain to look for you, I got hold of your thread, and it brought me here." "Then you've come from my house, have you?" "Yes, I have." "And I never knew it. Then perhaps you can tell me why my grandmother has brought me here. Something woke me. I didn't know what, but I was frightened, and I felt for the thread, and there it was. I was more frightened still when I found myself out on the mountain. But it brought me here, and oh, Curdie, your mother has been so kind to me, just like my own grandmother." "Then you didn't see the goblins?" said Curdie. "No, I haven't been into the mountain, I told you." "But the goblins have been into your house, all over it, and into your bedroom, making such a row." "What did they want there? It was very rude of them." "They wanted you, to carry you off with them for a wife to their Prince Harelip." "Oh, how dreadful!" cried the princess, shuddering. "But how did you come to be in my house, and me not know it?" Then Curdie had to explain everything, how he had been wounded and shut up by the soldiers, and how the beautiful old lady had come to him. "Poor Curdie, to lie there hurt and ill!" exclaimed the princess. "I would have come and nursed you if they had told me." "I didn't see you were lame," said his mother. "Am I, mother?" "Oh, yes, I suppose I ought to be. I declare I've never thought of it since." "Let me see the wound," said his mother. He pulled down his stocking, when behold, except a great scar, his leg was perfectly sound. Curdie and his mother gazed in each other's eyes, full of wonder, but Irene called out, "I thought so, Curdie! Don't you smell the roses? It was my grandmother healed your leg and sent you to help me. I wish my king papa would come. I do want so to tell him how good you have been." "But," said the mother, "we are forgetting how frightened your people must be. You must take the princess home at once, Curdie, or at least go and tell them where she is." "Yes, mother, only I'm dreadfully hungry. Do let me have some breakfast first." And he sat at the table. "You shall, my boy, as fast as I can get it," said his mother. But Curdie jumped up again so suddenly as to startle them both. "Mother, mother!" he cried. "I was forgetting. You will have to take the princess home yourself. I must go and wake my father." Without a word of explanation, he rushed to where his father was sleeping. Having thoroughly roused him with what he told him, he darted out of the cottage. He had remembered the resolution of the goblins to carry out their second plan upon the failure of the first. No doubt they were already busy, and the mine was therefore in the greatest danger of being flooded and rendered useless. After rousing all the miners within reach, he led them to the mine, where he found his father and a good many more, near the hole by which he had made his way into the goblin country. There, the foresight of his father had already collected a great many blocks of stone, with cement, ready for building a huge buttress filling the whole passage, and supported everywhere by the live rock. Before the hour when they usually dropped work, they were satisfied the mine was secure. Then they heard the sounds of water, and as they left the mine, they stepped out into a tremendous storm which was raging all around. The wind was blowing as if it would blow them off their feet, but, anxious about his mother and the princess, Curdie darted off ahead through the thick of the tempest. The streams had swollen to such an extent that their little house was in danger, but the moment his hand fell on the latch of the door came the joyous cry of the princess. She was sitting wrapped in a blanket on the bed. The clay floor was one mass of mud, and the whole place looked wretched. But the faces of the mother and the princess shone as if their troubles only made them the merrier. Curdie burst out laughing at the sight of them. "I never had such fun," said the princess, her eyes twinkling and her pretty teeth shining. "How nice it must be to live in a cottage on the mountain." "It all depends on what kind your inside house is," said the mother. "I know what you mean," said Irene. "That's the sort of thing my grandmother says." By the time Curdie's father returned, the storm was nearly over, but it was out of the question for the princess to go down the mountain. "We cannot help it," he said. "We must wait until morning." The next day the sun rose brightly. After an early breakfast, Curdie and his mother set out to take the princess home, walking gently down towards the king's house. And what should they see as they turned the last corner but the king's troop riding through the gate? "Oh, Curdie!" cried Irene right joyfully. "My king papa has come!" The moment Curdie heard that, he caught her up in his arms and set off at full speed, crying, "Come on, mother dear! The king may break his heart before he knows that she is safe." Irene clung round his neck, and he ran with her like a deer. When he entered the gate into the court, there sat the king on his horse, with all the people of the house about him, weeping and hanging their heads. The king was not weeping, but his face was as white as a dead man's. They were all so absorbed in their own misery that no one observed Curdie's arrival, so he went straight up to the king. "Papa! Papa!" the princess cried, stretching out her arms. "Here I am!" The king started. The colour rushed to his face, and he gave an inarticulate cry. Curdie held up the princess, and the king bent down and took her into his arms as the big tears went dropping down his cheeks and beard, and a great shout rose from the bystanders. The princess greeted them all as she nestled in her father's bosom, and the king did not set her down until she had told them the whole story. But she had more to tell about Curdie than about herself, and then Sir Walter and others added to what she told, even Lootie joining in the praise of his courage and energy. "And there is Curdie's mother, King Papa," Irene said. "See, there! She is such a nice mother, and has been so kind to me." They all parted asunder as the king made a sign for her to come forward. She obeyed, and he gave her his hand, but could not speak. "And now, King Papa," the princess went on, "I must tell you another thing. One night long ago, Curdie drove the goblins away and brought Lootie and me safe from the mountain. And I promised him a kiss when we got home, but Lootie wouldn't let me give it him. I don't want you to scold Lootie, but I want you to tell her that a princess must do as she promises." "Indeed she must, my child, except it be wrong," said the king. "There, give Curdie a kiss." As he spoke, he held her towards him. The princess reached down, threw her arms round Curdie's neck, and kissed him on the mouth, saying, "There, Curdie, that's the kiss I promised you." Then they all went into the house, and Lootie dressed Irene in her shiningest clothes. Then a messenger was sent for Curdie's father and all the miners, and there was a great and glorious feast. The king's harp player was chanting a ballad, when all at once he ceased. Irene went to her father, who took her upon his knee, and she said in his ear, "King Papa, do you hear that noise?" "I hear nothing," said the king. "Listen," she said, holding up her finger. The king listened. "I do hear a noise," he said at length, "a noise as of distant thunder. It is coming nearer and nearer. What can it be?" Then Curdie, who had slipped from his seat and laid his ear to the ground, rose up quickly, and approaching the king said, speaking very fast, "Please, your majesty, I think I know what it is. I have no time to explain, for that might make it too late for some of us. Will your majesty give orders that everybody leave the house as quickly as possible and get up the mountain?" The king, who was the wisest man in the kingdom, knew well there was a time when things must be done and questions left till afterwards. He had faith in Curdie, and rose instantly, with Irene in his arms. "Every man and woman follow me," he said, and strode out into the darkness. Before the last of them had crossed the court, out after them from the great hall came a huge rush of turbid water, and almost swept them away. But they got safe out of the gate and up the mountain, while the torrent went roaring down the road and into the valley. "Now, Curdie," said the king, "what does it mean? Is this what you expected?" "It is, your majesty," said Curdie, and proceeded to tell him about the second scheme of the goblins, to flood the mine and drown the miners. Then he explained what the miners had done to prevent it. The goblins had let loose all the underground reservoirs and streams, expecting the water to run down into the mine, not knowing of the solid wall close behind. But the readiest outlet the water could find was the tunnel they had made to the king's house, and every moment the torrent was increasing. "We must set out at once," said the king. "But how to get at the horses?" "Shall I see if we can manage that?" said Curdie. "Do," said the king. Curdie gathered the men-at-arms and took them over the garden wall to the stables. They found the horses in terror. The water was rising fast around them. There was no way to get them out except by riding them through the stream. Curdie got on the king's white charger and led them all in safety to the rising ground. "Look! Look, Curdie!" cried Irene as he dismounted. Curdie did look, and saw, high in the air, a great globe of light shining like the purest silver. There shot from it a white bird, which descending made one circle round the king and Curdie and the princess, then glided up again. The light and the pigeon vanished together. Curdie lifted Irene up to her father's arms as he sat astride his horse. "My child," said the king, "you will be cold. Curdie, my boy, run and fetch anything you can lay your hands on to keep the princess warm. We have a long ride before us." Curdie was gone in a moment, and soon returned with a great rich fur, and the news that dead goblins were tossing about in the current through the house. They had been caught in their own snare. The king turned to Sir Walter and said, "Bring Curdie's father and mother here." "I wish," he said, when they stood before him, "to take your son with me. He shall enter my bodyguard at once and wait further promotion." They were overcome. "Please, your majesty," Curdie said, "I cannot leave my father and mother." "But Curdie," said his mother, "why shouldn't you go with the king? We can get on very well without you." "But I can't get on very well without you." "Oh, please, your majesty, if you wouldn't mind giving my mother a red petticoat. I should have got her one long ago, but for the goblins." "As soon as we get home," said the king, "Irene and I will search out the warmest one to be found and send it by one of the gentlemen." "That we will, Curdie," said the princess. "And next summer we'll come back and see you wear it, Curdie's mother. Shan't we, King Papa?" "Yes, my love, I hope so," said the king. Then, turning to the miners, he said, "Will you do the best you can for my servants tonight? I hope they will be able to return to the house tomorrow." The miners with one voice promised their hospitality. Then the king commanded his servants to mind whatever Curdie should say to them, and after shaking hands with him and his father and mother, the king and the princess and all their company rode away into the starry night.